I did not know we were live.
Alhamdulillah. Bismillah wa salatu wa salamu ala nabiyyi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Ashhadu wa la ilaha ashhadu Muhammad Rasulullah. Allahumma irfana bidunya wa akhirah wa atina kullu khairan bihadha kalaman azeeman yawman. MashaAllah. We thank Allah for our beautiful beloved Dr. Nisa, who is, alhamdulillah, not only the vice chair of the Academy of Muslim Achievement, which is the originator of was also the associate dean for religious life at Howard University. It is an honor to have Dr. Nisa, who is really a leader amongst us. I mean, beautiful but brilliant. And this is a modern day, journey that we are This is a modern day journey that we are taking place, full of technical challenges, just like imagine your Underground Railroad with Sojourner Truth or Harriet Tubman, and imagine the difficulties that they began to take as they sought to lead their people to the promised land. And so therefore, this is nothing else than something such as that. So I'm going to turn it back over to Dr. Muhammad, a name that I love, not only because it's the name of our beautiful sister, but also the name of my late father and mother. May Allah have mercy upon them, Rahimah, grant them paradise and allow us to be joined with them in Jannat al-Firdaus. So without any further ado, I'm going to turn it back over to Dr. Muhammad to introduce the speakers, and we'll bring them on the screen, and then also begin this conversation, this journey to the end of racism.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alamin. Let me apologize to our viewers profusely. I did not know we were live. I thought he was just teasing me that we were live. Let me apologize profusely. So welcome to our show, The End of Racism. We're so very happy to have you, and we're so very happy to have our speakers. We have a wonderful list of speakers and presenters for you this evening that we are assured you will get so much from them. Allow me to introduce them to you. First of all, let me introduce to you Imam Mikal. Imam Mikal currently serves as an Imam at Masjidullah in Philadelphia. He's the Assistant Northeast Regional Section Convener of Imams of the Masjid of the Association of the Late and Great Imam W.D. Muhammad. He has been teaching Imams and Muslim excellence. He is a team leader and a physical science teacher at the New Africa Ummah Online School. Please welcome Imam Mikal Shabazz with a warm round of applause. He can't hear you, but thumbs up if you could hear you. Imam Mikal, welcome so much to our program this evening. Also, let me introduce Hajj Hassan Patton Bey. And he's next on my list of people to introduce. Imam Hajj Hassan Patton Bey has been involved in Islamic education and Dawah efforts for over 25 years. He is currently the director of the Memphis Dawah Association, which engages in community building efforts in the city of Memphis across lines of separation such as religion, race, and age. With the Kuliyi, excuse me if I'm massacring that word, in tradition, in the Ottoman Empire, the Kuliyi was a welcoming place where the public's social, cultural, health, and spiritual needs were met. It is the intention of the MDA to honor this tradition by bringing the Kuliyi in the city of Memphis. Next, we have the wonderful, amazing Dr. Fatimah L.C. Jackson. She is a professor in the Department of Biology at Howard University in Washington, D.C. She is an anthropologist. She is just an amazing, wonderful person. She received her BA and cum laude with the distinction in all subjects at Cornell University, her MA in biological anthropology at Cornell, and her PhD in biological anthropology at Cornell as well. Please welcome Dr. Fatimah Jackson, please. Next, we have Hassan Amin, who is from the wonderful city by the Bay, Baltimore, Maryland. And he represents that community and all the wonderful things that he does. Imam Amin, please welcome him. I think I'm hearing someone's background. And last, but not least, we want to welcome, I think that's everyone. Oh, last but not least, we want to welcome Imam Sulaimaan from the Atlanta Masjid of Al-Islam. There he is. We have everyone. Please welcome all of our speakers, and we're so very happy to have each of you. And now I'm going to turn it back over to our host, Attorney Talib Kareem. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Again, we thank Allah for blessing us with our beautiful and brilliant leader who's doing so much good work for our students at Howard University and for the country, Dr. Nisa Muhammad. Again, this is a blessing that we have such a distinguished panel of leaders to help us on this journey to the end of racism. This historic 1.5 hour conversation with leaders in our community from around the country to give us the insight on how we got to where we are right now, where we have not only the likes of the late George Floyd being killed, but so many others, from Michael Brown to Eric Gardner to Breonna Taylor, so many lives lost. How did we get here? And so we're looking forward to that conversation. So then we can then determine, well, how do we go from here to the end of racism? And was there an example? Is there a model? Because in order for people to go to the end of a journey, they have to have a picture of what that end of that journey looks like. And so we're looking forward to having that type of conversation. We're in a pandemic, and people are losing their lives. Over 100,000 people in this country have lost their lives. I think it's important for us at least to start with a wellness check-in with those who are with us. So can we go around and have everybody give us an understanding about how they are doing and how their communities are faring right now? Imam Mikal, would you start, please?
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum, beloved brothers and sisters. And thank you, Esquire Talib, for inviting me to join in such a distinguished panel. I thank you for allowing me to go first, too, because I'm sure they would be a hard act to follow. So, by Allah's grace, Masjidullah has been resilient in handling the pandemic, and that we have a number of ongoing activities. Although we don't have our Juma live, we are able to streamline Juma, and alhamdulillah, we've been able to do that. And there are a few people who are at the masjid while we're streamlining, but alhamdulillah, we've been able to continue in that manner. We've had janazas at the various funeral homes, and of course the state requires that we maintain certain distances and have a limited number of people, both at the funeral parlor as well as at the cemetery. But we've had a couple of incidents where people have passed and we were able to conduct a janazah. And of course, in those occasions, they were streamlined as well. In addition to that, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, out of His grace, has blessed Masjidullah to be able to feed people now for the past 20 years. And we actually take food to people in need, and the majority of whom are not Muslims. And so as a result of our history, the Church of Latter-day Saints were searching out an organization in our neighborhood where the masjid is located that can serve as a base for the distribution of food. And so they actually donated 40,000 pounds of food, which we then were able to distribute it to the Muslim community as well as to the general community at large. In addition to that, we also served as a location for meal distribution for children from Monday through Friday. Since the schools were closed down, children who normally would get a meal at school would not have been able to do so if the schools are not open. So we, by the grace of Allah, allowed for our facility to be open so that the children in the neighborhood can get food. But in addition to that, we provided food for regular families at least Monday and Tuesdays of every week. And so people could come and get a package of food. In terms of the economics, we had a fundraiser. As a result of the pandemic, we had to cancel 2 of the major events that we had scheduled, which we were anticipating receiving a substantial amount of money. And by the grace of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we reached out to the general community as well as to our members, and were able to get not only the amount that we were shooting for, but about 50% more. And so that was alhamdulillah rabbil alameen, it was a mercy from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So in addition to that, by Allah's grace, my wife, who is a nurse and professor of nursing at the University of Pennsylvania, had been talking with one of her friends who is a physician, and they were talking about this whole pandemic, and the doctor was talking about how they were going around to different religious houses of worship throughout the community to do some testing, because many of the African American communities have not been tested. And so there was a doctor, Ayla Stanford, who took it upon herself to go and do testing so that we could, have some basis for determining what the status of our susceptibility was to the Pandora virus. So as a result of my wife's efforts, along with Dr. Thomas, who was a member of this volunteer team, we were able to set up a testing date at the Masjid that resulted in doing 300 tests for people within the community. Not just the Muslims, but we had provisions for drive-thrus as well as walk-ins, so that people who wanted to be tested could be tested. And by Allah's grace, we were able to do tests for 300 persons. My wife had, been so enthused about it. She was talking to everybody and her brother about how happy she was, and even to her son, who was inspired on the basis of just her report of how wonderful that program was, how organized it was. And he was so inspired that he reached out to some friends of his who he played hockey with in college, and they have a company, and they provided 200 masks for the physicians, or face shields for the workers who were dealing with this volunteer effort for the COVID-19 testing. So again, by the grace of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we also formed a task force that consisted of elected officials, health officials, as well as imams of different masjid and other interested members, where we met weekly to give a status on what the situation was with respect to those particular areas of concern, to update us on the political developments in terms of the health status of the
Alhamdulillah,
and so forth. Alhamdulillah.
Alhamdulillah.
So
we thank the Imam for his outstanding overview, and we ask the rest of our guests to just give us a real brief just health wellness check-in as we have a very diligent schedule. Dr. Fatimah.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. So greetings to everyone that's on this call, and to my colleagues on the call. I will speak about the impact on the academic community. I believe that just as you were shocked, we were also shocked at the intensity of the SARS-CoV-2 virus infection that causes COVID-19. And we were amazed at how pathogenic it is. I mean, how much how much disorder and corruption it causes. But we've also tried to look at this as a opportunity. And so at Howard University, where I'm teaching, we shifted immediately to online classes, and that presented, new opportunities. I think that even though the virus and the continuation of racial animosity and police brutality has had a psychological toll on the community, we are struggling to balance and maintain the balance. And when it seemed as though COVID-19 was the primary source of distress, then here comes the almost daily revelations of the manifestations of white supremacy and racism. Of course, we've had to deal with this for the entirety of our time in the United States, 401 years, but to have it visually displayed in the way that the technology now permits is a bit of a challenge. And it's a challenge for academics and intellectuals. I know that many of us are writing articles about the impact of white supremacy and racism. So we're trying to take our frustrations and incorporate our critiques into our writings, so that our writings are not esoteric, but they are very much tied to the current day realities. And that's one way of dealing with the adverse effects of the racism, which has always been there at a low level. It's just that it's spiked in terms of public awareness. How this will all turn out, we don't know. We're scientists. We try to make predictions about the future, but we're really in a very delicate situation, and I'll have more to say on that a little bit later.
Imam Sulaimaan, can you give us a checkup on your community and your family? Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam. Sound check is okay?
Yes, sir.
Bismillah. So we want to thank you, Attorney Talib, Dr. Muhammad, and the other organizers of this call. As for Atlanta, I think I could almost hijack my friend Imam Mikal's schedule of services that we've been providing the people. I think they may have a few more pounds of food than we got and distributed. But of the things that I've been trying to, and the leadership in Atlanta have been trying to focus on during this time, is the mental health and the spiritual health. The challenge of the Muslim community who've not just been able to socialize. We may not realize how serious of a thing that is for the Muslims, in that we're used to socializing every week as part of our, spiritual practice. And so just trying to provide that spiritual care. Alhamdulillah, no one has contracted coronavirus. That's a blessing. Those other services, trying to upgrade those services, but just tuning in to that spiritual self, that mental self of our community, and making sure that we're healthy there too, in addition to our physical health.
Alhamdulillah. Alhamdulillah, we appreciate that. And briefly, can we have Imam Hassan, Amin, give us an update from there in Baltimore? Imam Amin, can you hear us? Imam Amin. Imam Amin, can you hear us? Okay, maybe he can't hear us. Okay, and that's modern day technology and television for you. Sheikh Hassan Bey, how about you? Can you hear us?
Yes, alhamdulillah. Assalamu alaikum rahmatullah. Alhamdulillah, it's a pleasure seeing all of you, and alhamdulillah, for regards to Memphis, alhamdulillah, we are partnering with the local Mid-South Food Bank, inshallah, and so inshallah, hopefully within the next coming weeks, we'll be helping with that partnership, feeding approximately 300 families per day. It'll be 1 day a week, inshallah. Alhamdulillah, our family is well, and we've been checking in on the members of the community and things like that as best that we can, through the phone and limited meetings and things like that. But alhamdulillah, the situation presents an opportunity for ourselves to to regroup and to reassess what we've done in the past, and inshallah to do much better, inshallah, in the future. You have a nation right now that is scared and is unsettled, and inshallah, as Muslims, inshallah, we will help lead the communities for Muslims and for non-Muslims through this very trying period with so many things going on at this time.
And is Imam Amin Hassan Al-Amin, can he hear us now? Can you hear us, Imam Hassan Al-Amin? Okay. Well, we will, inshallah, pick him back up at some later point. Again, this is a broadcast that is being streamed on multiple platforms. We have dozens of people who are watching us right now on Facebook, on YouTube, and on Zoom. In fact, the Zoom platform is our kind of virtual studio audience. So we're going to, inshallah, allow them to come in and actually ask questions for our speakers at some point during the show. And they're sending us comments right now that we're taking as we can. So to take a step back, I'm the CEO and legal director for an online platform called ABE, which is launched to provide virtual legal appointments for clients to meet with their lawyers both virtually and affordably. In addition, and we thank ABE for their support in launching this outstanding program, as they provided the initial backbone, if you will, for the conversation tonight. In addition to that, I've also taught labor relations and business law at colleges here in the DC region, including Bowie State University. And at the beginning of every semester, I always ask my students a couple of questions that I'll ask you. First of all, how did racism begin? How did racism begin? And then I also drilled down to them a second question that I asked, and that is, well, who were the first slaves? Because they tend to kind of go hand in hand. And we know as Muslims, there an answer, particularly for the first question. As we may know, again, racism began when Allah, as recited in Surah Al-Baqarah, when Allah says, إِذْ قُلْنَا لِلْمَلَائِكَةِ اسْجُدُوا لِلْمَلَائِكَةِ فَقَالَ وَقُلْنَا لِاسْجُدُوا لِلْمَلَائِكَةِ فَسَجَدُوا إِلَّا إِبْلِيسَ أَبَى وَاسْتَكْبَرَ وَكَانَ مِنَ الْكَافِرِينَ. And Allah says He commanded the angels to prostrate, and they prostrated, and except Iblis. And the word istakbara is a word, as a student of Arabic and a student of Sirah of the Prophet ﷺ, of the history of the Prophet ﷺ, we know that this word istakbara comes from a concept of kibara, or a superiority feeling. And related to this word istakbara is the word unsariya, which means a racial superiority. And this concept was that Iblis said that I will not bow down to Adam because khalaqani min al-nar, or you created me out of fire, wa khalaqahu min tin, and you created him out of. And so in that statement, he uttered the first ideology of racial superiority, to say that my race was superior to his race, to the race of mankind. And that began what we have now from the beginning of time until now. And so the answer to my students' questions were, who is the first racist? Where did it begin? And we know that racism began from Iblis. And then the second question then is, well, how did it come to America? How did racism come to America? And then I asked them a question, well, who were the first slaves? And to understand how it came to America, you have to understand, well, who were the first slaves? Most of my students will say, well, the first slaves were African. Then others who are more astute will say, well, no, it was the Native Americans. And then I have to point out to them that, in fact, the Africans did not arrive here to the Americas until a generation after the first British colonizers landed on this country, in this continent, before it was a country, actually. And then, so then I go back to the point of Native Americans, and I say, well, before the Native Americans were actually captive and made to slave for those European settlers, who were the people doing the labor? Because clearly it was not the aristocracy. Clearly it was not the monarchy or the monarchists, right? Because and again, to understand this, you have to go to the labor structure of Europe. And the labor structure of Europe was based on a monarchy. And a monarchy, is those of us who are on this call understand, is based on a hierarchy, a pyramidal shaped hierarchy, where a few families are at the very zenith of that pyramid, followed by another layer of people who they appoint to serve as their kind of intermediaries, that they call the aristocracy. And then the bottom, the vast majority of this pyramid is made up of the majority, which they call the serfs. And for anybody who understands the word serfs, serf is a term which is a synonymous to another term, which is called subject. And subject is a term which is synonymous to a term called slave. And so the people who were brought over to do the work of Europe were the serfs. And serfs were, again, and you have to understand that there was, again, no kind of concept of race, but it was only based upon the family, if you will. And so those families who were at the top, those are the monarchs, and everybody else at the bottom were the slaves or the subjects of the monarch. And they were all white. And that's the thing that I had to teach my students. So the idea that the Caucasians were, that slavery was based on race did not occur until actually at least 2 generations after it. Because when the Africans arrived, again in 1619, many of us know that number, they were sold on the same auction blocks as the Caucasian servants, and they try to again create another dichotomy later, which will describe the Caucasians as indentured servants, and then the Africans as being slaves. But initially, all of them, both Africans, Caucasians, and even Native Americans, were working as slaves on these plantations. But then a strange phenomenon began to happen. What began to happen, and I'm sure Dr. Jackson is aware of this, is that there were insurrections that took place across the colonies. And it got to a point where the colonizers or the rulers began to see that they were going to go the pathway of the French Revolution. As you may know, the peasants overthrew the monarchy in France. And so there was a fear that, again, here in this colony, that they were going to, again, see that same type of, overthrow by the peasants. So as a way of preventing this continuum of collaboration and teamwork, if you will, to change the status of the majority, the vast majority, the rulers began to come up with a scheme. And the scheme is based upon what we taught our students is synonymous amongst us, particularly African Americans, with the word, and those particularly in the military, called divide and conquer. And divide and conquer is based upon pitting groups of people against one another. And so they began to create a caste system, similar to the caste system in India, where they, again, gave more privileges to people based upon the color of their skin. And so that is exactly what began to happen. And by doing that, you turned the workers from, projecting their frustration outward against those who had them in bondage, turned that inward and began to have the workers and the slaves fight amongst themselves. That system of division started then and continues even to today. And some of the tools that are used to keep the workers apart include the media. Again, the images that show people in their respective positions and where they belong. Second of all, even religion. Particularly the religion of Christianity, which shows a picture of Isa alayhi salam, which, again, the Christians today call their God. They project him as being, again, their God. And so, therefore, people who are Caucasians feel a sense of superiority, and those who are not Caucasian feel a sense of inferiority. And sadly, even though we as Muslims do not subscribe to that, even Muslims, those who have come over to this country, particularly from lands that have been colonized by the Europeans, have sadly adopted the same paradigm. And so instead of coming over to the United States and again blending in even with those Muslims who had arrived very early at the beginning of the origins of this country, and beginning to work with them and build Islam in a harmonious manner, like the Prophet ﷺ did in Medina, they came over and adopted the ideology of the those who created this caste system, and they fell straight into that. And they looked upon themselves as being superior because they were folks who either were of lighter skin complexion, and if not of lighter skin complexion, they were again given more privileges because they were from another country, as opposed to the African Americans and the indigenous who are at the very bottom of the caste system here in the United States. And so that is the concept that we talk about today, is that this is the where we have come from. Now, where we go is a pathway to that community in Medina, a multiracial, multi-ethnic, multi-class community that ended racism and brought together people along tribal lines. And so we are going to turn it over to the leaders of our community to help you to understand their own experiences and how do we get to that Medinan model. So without any further ado, I want to turn it over to Imam Mikal, who will give us his own perspectives. And we look forward to that, and we look forward to your questions and comments that you can share with us later. Thank you, Imam Mikal.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, of course, is the best knower on how and what we need to do. And basically, it comes down to a matter of the heart. We have to rid our hearts of this disease. And we have to do a number of things in order to do that. You have to be careful of the influences the subliminal influences that cause us to think that we're better than someone else because of the color of our skin. And so we have to we have to watch our language so that we don't give anyone the impression that as a result of, the color of our skin, that we are better or worse than others. We have to become more Islamic. And what I mean by that, we have to incorporate the principles of our deen and be able to demonstrate how Muslims are supposed to live. So when we have the opportunity to exchange with others of another race or ethnic group, then we need to take advantage of doing that. And the best opportunity is for the Muslims to demonstrate that, because at our different Jumu'ah, we have many folks from different ethnic groups in the audience. We have the Africans, we have the Arabs, we have the Indians, we have the Caucasians. We have a number of people, and in fact, at our masjid, we have in the past invited persons from those various ethnic groups to come and give a khutbah to let folks see that this Islam is the religion of mankind. And so, alhamdulillah, by the demonstration of that diversity or that unity and diversity by virtue of the fact that we have people come not only to give the khutbah, but to even conduct classes at our masjid. We've had a diversified group of people who have come and shared with us what Allah has blessed them with, so that our constituents can then see that this religion is not based on race, but it's based on taqwa. And that's the basis upon which we need to proceed. So there are basically 5 things that we can do. First, again, commit to removing racial statements from our tongue in public and private places. To be empathetic, to seek to understand other points of view. For example, imagine always being treated less than, or even our life is less valued. Imagine that. Also imagine having certain privileges and someone suddenly says these privileges should be taken away. And look at your close friend pool and look and make friends with people from other races. Make sure with all your large private parties, if you have them, to be sure to invite guests so that you have an interracial audience within your guests. And delay teaching kids about racism. At least, of course, you want to make them aware and do things in that manner. And then most importantly, of course, we always, as we said at the beginning, turn to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and we emphasize what Allah says. There's no superiority of one over another, either Arab over non-Arab, or a non-Arab over an Arab, or black over white, or white over black, and that the best of us is those who are more God conscious. So we're going to emphasize that hadith of the Prophet Muhammad in his last sermon, as well as in the Quran, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about this fact that the best of you, that he has created us in tribes and nations, not so that we would despise each other, but so that we would come to know each other. And the best of us in the sight of God are those of us who are most righteous. And obviously we need to pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to remove racism from our hearts and from the hearts of our society. We want a pure heart, the qalb salim. We want a heart that's based on our love of God and a love of God's creation. And of course, we need to study more about our religion, but not only study it, but after studying it, to incorporate it into our lives so that we can demonstrate and be a living example to the people, as the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ has been an example to us. And we know that this problem started a long time ago, as Esquire Talib mentioned, with Shaitan. And it even continued at the time of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. You know, at the very beginning of the spread of Islam, there was Walid ibn Mughira, who was the father of Khalid bin Walid, who wanted to accept Islam, but he wanted there not to be any blacks among them when he came among the Muslims to learn about it. And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed 3 ayats that talked about the injustice of such a thing, to remove Bilal ibn Rabah or Ibn Masud, who were dark, and Ammar, who they were dark-skinned people, and this person didn't want to be among them when he came to learn about the religion. He was a very influential person. And so if the Prophet Muhammad had done that, then they would have came. But Allah revealed to the Prophet that this was improper. But not only at the beginning of Islam, at the conquest of Mecca, you know, Bilal was told by the Prophet to go call the adhan at the Kaaba. And somebody, you know, was saying, you know, look, man, I'm glad my father died, because if he had seen this, he would have probably had a heart attack seeing this black guy. And then somebody else said, why couldn't the Prophet get somebody else who was more prestigious, more pure, than getting this black crow to call the adhan? And so, who was it? Abu Sufyan was among them when they were making his comments, and he hesitated from saying anything because he thought that the angel may come and tell the Prophet about it. But anyway, there's a long history about this whole situation. We, I think, are blessed to be in a position to demonstrate how it is to really demonstrate true brother and sisterhood. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam. Thank you, Brother Imam. And to continue that recitation of maybe even giving us some of his own personal experience, this with racism, both in the broader community and in the Islamic community. We have Imam Sulaimaan Hamid, who is the Imam, resident Imam of the Atlanta Masjid, one of the largest Muslim communities in America. Imam Sulaimaan.
Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wa salatu wa salam ala Muhammad. I was going to get a little suspicious that perhaps you and Imam Mikal saw my notes, because you all have almost the exact same talking points that I intended to share with tonight. But that's the beauty of our religion, and the clarity of Quran and the clarity of the Prophet is that these sources have this rich, knowledge that we all draw from. So personally, you know, and I'm going to go back to an ayah that Imam Mikal shared. In my personal life, being a teacher, you know, and in the space of scholarship and all of that, you often have, you know, people who would want you to believe that because you're an African American, because your parents were members of the Nation of Islam, and your and then, you know, Sunni Muslims in that pedagogy and that history that we have, that perhaps your Islamic experience is not as rich as theirs. And so we have to, in ending racism, part of it is ending it in our own minds. And in addition to helping the others, end it in theirs. And so the ayah that Imam Mikal shared, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and this was actually the ayah that I intended to share tonight, he deals with two identity crises that America and the world is dealing with. When he says, Ya ayyuhan nas, inna khalaqnakum min dhakarin wa untha wa ja'alnakum shu'uban wa qaba'il lita'arafu inna akramakum indallahi atqakum. O humanity, I have created you from males and females, and made you tribes and nations so that you'll come to know each other. And the most noble of you in Allah's sight is the one who has or is most regardful of God, regardful of Allah. So in the beginning of that ayah, you know, we have this challenge now in the world, and I won't get too controversial on you all's live stream. I'm a little radical sometimes, that people now have the challenge of, you know, their identity as males and females. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala clarifies that too, in that he created you with these distinct identities. And then he says, and we created you tribes and nations. Now the ta'arafu there, we most often turn it to know somebody else. But in the first part of that is knowing your own tribe, knowing your own nation, right? And so before I can even get to know somebody else, I have to have a healthy knowledge of self. And so part of how we're going to end racism and end these superiority complexes and these super egos is knowing my own value, knowing that Allah created me with identity, created me with history, created me with richness. And there's nothing wrong with that. He says he created you. And then he humbles everybody when he says that akramakum, the most noble of you in his sight, is not the male. So you can't do your chauvinism deal. It's not the female, so you can't do your woman power deal. It's not the white, it's not the black, it's not this tribe, it's not that tribe. It's the one who has regardfulness of Allah. That's the one to Allah who is most noble. So in our work and in our efforts of overcoming this disease of racism and these other isms, genderism and this ism and that ism, is reminding ourselves that the most important thing is regardfulness and having this knowledge of Allah, but having healthy knowledge of self, healthy knowledge of others, and respecting myself and respecting others, a male, female, tribe, this and that, as we move forward with overcoming this. And then lastly, if I may, because as I said, Attorney Talib, you hit the nail on the head with that the things spurred from the devil himself, spurred and came out of the devil himself. And so the other thing that we have to do, and going back to that Medina model, because I think that was in our title, is helping people remove that image that God is a European American, and any human for that matter. So that's a bigger conversation, but particularly that European American who's put that poison in the world. We have to work to again make Allah greater and raise Allah up and remove that from the minds and the hearts of people, that nothing is greater than God, and none of us are on the equality, on the equal with Allah, and helping people overcome that. And if we remove that foundation, then we can, tear down some of these other idols that have been brought up in the world, like racism, inshallah.
Well, alhamdulillah, that's a powerful articulation. And I think that we have, again, in our midst, a scholar of anthropology who can break this down, because as you talk about from a biological standpoint, it's clear that Isa alayhi salam, even in the text of Christendom, was a black man, if you were going to, put a racial connotation on him. And then even the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, you have to understand that his lineage was a lineage of black people. Even the Arab people have long been black before they were Europeanized, after they conquered much of the European world. So they were mostly Africans, or are Africanoid, if you were to go to a racial connotation. And even in the text of Hadith, and they say, well, he was white, the explanation of that is based upon what white men at that time. White meant not dark, as a Southern Sudanese might be considered dark. But you would be, again, in the context of this conversation now, clearly even the Prophet ﷺ would be considered an African American. So what this, again, I think I don't need to speak any further. Let me just turn it over to Dr. Fatimah Jackson, who knows this topic much more than me. Please, Dr. Jackson.
Well, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. So xenophobia, that is fear of the stranger, is really the basis for racism. And I really also believe that the fact that the racism begins with shaitan is also a statement of how close it is to our very existence, that we came out of a situation where we were initially despised by some part of Allah's creation. Okay, so what do we know? I really commend Imam Mikal and Imam Sulaimaan, because what they have said is absolutely correct from a scientific point of view. There was a study done in North Carolina that showed that when they redistrict the school districts, when they redesigned the school districts and put more European Americans in North Carolina in contact with African Americans in North Carolina, that the hostility towards African Americans actually declined. So knowing the other people, the other persons, is absolutely essential in combating racist ideas. We know that multi-ethnic communities like the United States, like the Ummah of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the multi-ethnic communities require more energy to keep them cohesive. That's because you've got more diversity. But out of that more diversity, you have more options. I mean, it's a winning situation if the communities are cohesive. But you have to put more energy in. It was assumed that multi-ethnic communities were inherently unstable. But that's actually not true. What we're finding is that they have the potential to be as stable as any other monolithic community, like in Japan or places where there's more homogeneity in the population. But what it is the attitudes that people bring into the community when it first starts. And so the comments of Imam Mikal and Imam Sulaimaan are particularly astute, because going back to the Islamic message is really helpful, because it's a guidance for how we can all get along and how we can discard the corruption introduced to us from our very beginnings, the corruption of xenophobia, the corruption of subdividing ourselves on the basis of criteria that we had no input in. I mean, I had no say in the color of my eyes or the color of my skin or the shape of my nose. That is just a gift from Allah. And what I do then is to try to have the behaviors that will be pleasing to Allah. And that's the part that we control. And it's the part that the Imams were saying. I want to also say that I think that Islam is really an evolutionary force. And it gives us a worldview, a perspective on what is happening to us now, what has happened to us in the past. And we may not always come to the same conclusions as this materialistic, capitalistic society. Now, for example, in Islam, sometimes the most degraded individual, that is the person who everyone else is looking down upon, is actually the most exalted. They said that the Sahabi used to relish when people were mistreating them, because it was an opportunity to get closer to Allah. You know, so we fortunately have that guidance of Islam that can help us interpret the realities that we're facing today. I would also say that when you look at the pattern of racism, this is not a different pattern than we've seen for 401 years, but it's in our face more. We're seeing the abuses. We're seeing the injustices more profoundly. And so we have to have an interpretive system which comes from Islam that is going to allow us to reconcile these hostilities that are out there, see them for what they are, that they're not statements of our real worth, that they are the imposition of bad ideas in another population being imposed upon us. And that way we can begin to confront and have the resilience we need to overcome this particular trying time in our people's history. So those are the main things that I wanted to say, that the vision to resolving the problems of racism must come from a clear analysis of our history, a reliance on the examples from the Islamic message, which is really a guideline for improving and evolving ourselves from a lower state to actually a better state. And I'm an evolutionary biologist, so I'm looking at these deaths and these murders of young Black men. And I want to make 2 points. That the first is that the murders show a pattern. We notice that the mean age is about 26, 27 years of age. So that's a very young age. It's ecologically, it's very expensive to lose a 27-year-old man, because you put all those inputs in, the education, the nutrition, the socialization, and then usually by the time a man is in his 30s or 40s, now he starts giving back to the society. But now if you've removed him before he's had a chance to give back, you've actually deprived the society at a higher ecological level. You've taken more than just killed a man. You've killed his young children. You've killed, you've reduced the chances of survival for those children. You've reduced the chances of survival for his significant other, his wife. You've really pulled from the society much more. So I'm looking at the list of the recent list of murders of Black men by white police officers and white law establishment people. And what I'm seeing is that it's not uniform across the months. That particular months, especially in April, seems to be very dangerous months for young African American men in their encounters with white police officers. Of course, it could be any month, but we see a lot of the recorded instances of murder in April. The other thing that we're seeing is that it's almost as if these young men are being targeted, and many times they knew the police perpetrators before. They had an encounter with them before, and it reminds me of like the way a shark will attack. A shark will identify a victim and then focus on that victim, even though there are other fish around. It will go after that target. Even if that target is far away, it will focus on that target. So there's an intentionality to the destruction of young Black men. And it's not a genocide, because a genocide is kind of like when the white colonialists would say the only good Indian is a dead Indian. Okay, so that's genocide. But this is a slow persecution. And we know from the Quran that persecution is worse than slaughter, because it creates a kind of psychological debilitation that we are still dealing with, and that we have developed the cultural resources to overcome, but they're being strained now because of the intensity of the assaults on our community. So again, the need to turn to Islam becomes greater, becomes amplified under the conditions of these kinds of oppressions. And I'm very grateful that you all have pulled together some of our best imams, good minds. Imam Attorney Talib Kareem, I'm grateful that you had the vision to get people together, and Sister Nisa, who's my colleague at Howard, pull people together. Let's talk about this, and let's provide some guidance to support all of us, because we are all suffering from this constant bombardment of the lie of racial superiority. Okay, I'll end my comments here and turn it back over to you. Thank you.
We appreciate that. Let us now bring on, I know that Imam Hassan Amin has had trouble. We're looking forward to him hopefully joining us via, we're hoping he will join us via Zoom at minimum. But for now, let us go to Hajj Hassan Bey from Memphis. Sheikh Hassan, give us your perspective, maybe even sharing some of your own experiences with racism. You are in Memphis, where my father, Dr. Talib Kareem Muhammad, may Allah have mercy upon him, was a member of the Memphis City Council after experiencing significant racism and oppression, not only as an African American, but also as a Muslim. Can you relate to some experiences such as that, and what are the inspirations that you take from the history of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam that gives answers to those who are looking for those answers today?
Sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Alhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalamu rasulillah. Memphis is a very interesting place. I was listening to a lecture earlier today regarding one of our brothers, and he was mentioning that Memphis has, in terms of religiosity, is ranked as one of the highest in the country. And at the same time, it's also ranked in terms of poverty and hunger among children. The thing is with Memphis is that you had the civil rights movement, of course, but for instance, it sort of stopped there. You didn't have, for example, the movement that was in the North regarding like the Black Power movement, these types of things. So you find people, when I first came here in the 90s, after my father, rahimahullah, had passed, I found people in the 90s who did not know who Malcolm X was. They did not know about, the struggles and things like that was up in the North. And so, but at the same time, there's a huge possibility here in Memphis in terms of its unique position close to Mississippi. You have a growing population here in terms of the Muslims, which is now approximately around 20,000, which is small, but it was much smaller. But you can have partnerships, for instance, with African-American farmers in Mississippi and in Arkansas and these types of things to fulfill the needs and farmers markets and these types of things. And then as a Muslim, we need to, for some of us, get out of the ostrich position and move to the position of leadership. We need to think in terms of the maqasid al-sharia, in terms of preservation of the religion, life, intellect, family, property, and dignity, and what that calls for in order for us to preserve that. It means that we're not thinking of, next week, but we need to be thinking 10, 20, 30 years from now, how to develop Islam, how can we be leaders. And the thing is, if we're able to provide answers to a society that is in crisis, this is a form of dawah. And right now people are searching for answers and they don't know where to get it. And we have the models in front of us. We have the Medina models in front of us. We have the other Islamic societies that was in front of us. But the thing is that like in Memphis, as in other cities, for the people who are native to this country and for, let's say, the immigrant population, immigrant brothers, is that not only you have the issue, let's say, of racism or caste that is between us, but we don't have the same agenda. In terms of, if you have people who have what I call like the comfort dream, they want to work and live in the suburbs, have children go to the public school, the weekend school and center, and just be with people who are like them. And the thing is that they may feel this type of comfort, but it's a disservice. There was a conversation I had with one of our immigrant brothers, and we were talking, and I said, well, you need to give dawah, for instance, to African Americans and things like that. And his response to me says, well, Hajj Hassan, I really don't feel comfortable, being around, people like that. I just feel comfortable around my own people. So I asked him, I said, well, you have lessons at your center and you only teach in Arabic, right? And he said, yeah. And I said, well, but your children don't speak Fusha, do they? He says, no. So then the children, the language of their understanding is in English. So when they are in the lessons that's speaking in Fusha Arabic, they're not paying attention. And so they are growing up not getting the basics of their religion. Whereas if that community had reached out, for instance, and did dawah, and you had, for instance, converts who were learning the religion and things like this, he would have something in common with the second generation of immigrant children. And so this lack of foresight and hidden racism is hurting particularly the community as a development. But I do want to mention that for me, that is a hope, because now you have the second generation of Muslims who've been raised in this country, who have had discrimination and these types of things. And so they are able to understand, at least to some part, the situation regarding, for instance, African-American Muslims. And I can see, inshallah, that these two particularly older African-Americans and the second generation coming together and forming, let's say, the basis for a community and being on the same page in terms of developing Islam in this country. The other thing is that, you know, you have in the past, there was sort of this blissful ignorance of American history regarding to African Americans and regarding to Native people. I mean, if you know, for instance, the history and regarding slavery and reservations, then you should not be surprised by, for instance, foreign policies that are harming people overseas. You know, you shouldn't be incredulous regarding that. So, but I have hope, as I mentioned before, in terms of going forward, that these second generations, we're able, hopefully, inshallah, to be working with them. They see the needs of social justice and racism and things like that much different than their parents. And I think going forward, that's going to, inshallah, be the path. But the thing is, we focus, and we have been focusing, rightfully so, on Fard Ain. But the thing is, we also have to focus on Fard Kifaya in building community across multi-ethnic lines. And if the Muslims don't do it, I mean, who can do it better than us? I mean, you have the Medina Mawar, we even have like the Ottoman Empire. And we had all of these different people from all over the world that were there. And, you know, it lasted for 700 years. So this is our role, this is our time, and we have to step up to that. And particularly as African Americans, we have an insight that is very valuable. And in the past, what has happened is that, you know, we were sort of brushed off and said, brother, you know, don't speak about, you know, this issue or that issue, or particularly social justice and things like this. But, you know, we're older now, and we've had our knocks and things like that. And inshallah, we need to move forward on that.
Very good.
Thank you. I think that Imam Hassan Amin, can you hear us, Imam? Are you able to hear us? He was having some difficulties earlier, and Imam Hassan, can you hear us? If you can't, alhamdulillah, we will. And this is, again, dear brothers and sisters, where we hope to go from here is begin a series of conversations every Sunday at 7 p.m. That we pray will lead to an end of the condition that we talked about as the racial caste system, a system set up to divide us, a system that, again, some point to Shaitan as having actually given or taught the rulers of the early colonies of the United States, actually literally taught them this, as it is said in the Quran of how the Shayateen taught the witchcraft of how to divide man and woman, as we talk about in the story of Sulaimaan alayhi salam. And so we believe that this is, again, a key, as people are wringing their arms about how do we, you know, end racism. Some people say, well, let's create $1 billion or $1 trillion fund and help people to get money. And I challenged one brother, and I said, well, even if you became a billionaire and your daughter went out to catch a cab, and the black cab driver who was driving passed her by because he hated himself, what good is that $1 billion to her when she needs to rush home to feed her children, for example, right? Or if you are in an emergency room, and because you are a person who looks like he could be a homeless or a drunkard, or again, or a criminal, because this is the mindset that has been taught not only to the Caucasian Americans who may be working in that emergency room, but also the immigrant physicians and nurses. And your life is literally less valuable, despite the fact that you may have, 20 zeros next to the ones or twos in your bank account. What good is that at that particular time? So this is the question. And again, I want to open up the audience for any questions that the audience might have. This is your time to ask questions, and this is your time to really give any feedback. Let me for while they're getting their questions ready, let me ask if there are any additional questions that some of the panelists or points that they want to make while we're getting
I don't have a question. I just want to say how fascinated I was by the comments of Dr. Fatimah. I don't know if I should address her as Dr. Fatimah or Dr. Jackson. And the points that the connection that she's making. What was the other science that you said, Doctor? You said you were anthropology.
Anthropology, and I do evolutionary biology. So
evolutionary biology. That one. And I'm sorry to interrupt, but and she could give more. But the connection that we make as in the theology field is the Pharaoh connection, and that he said he was going to kill the boys, but she took it up a notch. That was the point. She took it and expanded that. So that was just fascinating, and I'd love to read something about that if it's available.
Yes. I'll be glad to share whatever limited knowledge I have. To me, the science and the Islam fit together like hand in glove. And that to me was one of the things that convinced me of the accuracy of the Islamic message, that it made sense scientifically, because Islam is a thinking woman's religion. You don't have to be you're not supposed to be a dummy and be a Muslim. You're supposed to be thinking. So I also wanted to build on the Haji Hassan, our brother. He said he described the evolution of the Muslim community as like a maturation event. And I thought that was very important because we too were susceptible to seeing other people as being more informed, more pious, more knowledgeable than ourselves. And it's as if we had denied our own equality and the equality that Allah put in us as human beings. Then so we had to go through that phase of rejection of ourselves to see the limitations of other people's Islam. And then you start to realize that a lot of times people don't want to hear the true story of America because they didn't come here. They came here at, what did he say? The comfort dream. They came for economic benefit. They didn't come for spiritual enlightenment. It wasn't hijrah. There was no need for them to come to the United States of America except to improve the quality of their lives, materially improve the quality of their lives. So of course they'll produce these enclaves where we think, oh, it's Islamic, it's for us. And they're thinking, we don't want those people up in here. So, I have gone through the effects of being pushed away from non-African American Muslim communities time and time again. I'm a believer in the Islamic message, but they're not always believing in that same message, at least to the holistic aspects of it. Their pronunciation of Fusa is nice, and they have all the superficial accoutrements of piety. But when it comes down, when the rubber hits the road, and are they willing to have their son marry my daughter, or their daughter marry my son? Now that's when that's when the xenophobia comes in. And I said the xenophobia, fear of the other, is the basis for the racism. And it's an ugly devil that is very deeply embedded in our genomes. So we have to excise it. That's part. Islam gives you a pathway for cleansing, for removing some of the shaitanic influences that still permeate our existence, you know, and that degenerate us as human beings. So this is the insight that I'm coming to, that perhaps that we should give ourselves permission to take the leadership in having a new approach to racism, you know, an Islamic-based approach. It's not that we're going along to get along. No, because that's not the Islamic example. It's confronting it, but not being influenced by it, so that we are accepting the foolishness of our inferiority, because we're the opposite of inferior. You know, I don't want to say that we're superior, but I'm saying that we're doing pretty well given what we've had to go through. So let's not deny that, you know. Let's build on the strengths. Okay, one quick example of this. When I had taught most of my academic life at PWIs, at predominantly white institutions. And when I went to Howard 7 years ago, I was faced with all these Black people that I hadn't seen since I was a child, you know, because I grew up in a Black community, but then I went to white universities, and then I taught in white universities where I was the minority, and that became my reality. So when I went to Howard and I'd see groups of Black men, and I check myself and I say, whoops, am I threatened by these Black men? They say, wait a minute, these men look like my sons. So, you know, we have to train ourselves, which is, I believe, what Imam Mikal and Imam Sulaimaan were saying. It starts with us. Who are we? Who do we say we are? We say we're Muslims. Well, what does that mean? Well, we have the right to define what that means and what our relationship will be. And we should constantly be projecting this confidence and peace, salam, and a surety that we know something that's factual and true, and we want to share, and people will be like a magnet, and people will come to us, including our immigrant brothers and sisters who will come to us, because as soon as they started facing some oppression, a little teeny oppression, like a pinprick, weren't they calling you all up and saying, "Oh, please, could you just give us some kind of direction on how we can get over this racism?" You know, like it was like they had encountered some big thing. I'm talking about 9/11. You know, where a lot of the African Americans I knew, Muslims, we said after 9/11, oh, you don't like our scarves? Now we're going to get really big scarves and wear them. Now we're really going to be Muslims now. You know, so we need to take leadership and stop handing it off to other people for superficial aspects of piety, like your pronunciation of Bafusa. That's a superficial. That's not what Allah is looking at. He's looking at our hearts. So the Imams were absolutely right. Change our behavior, and everything around us will change.
And on that note, we got a question from an Aisha Jackson, perhaps somebody who you may know. So I won't ask you, Dr. Jackson, but for the other leaders that are here assembled, what are some practical tips for purification of the heart? Yughsul Qaluba. What are the particular next steps? If somebody says, okay, I'm ready to end racism within myself, what might you recommend, Imam Sulaimaan or Imam Mikal or Sheikh Hassan? What would they do? What would they need to do? Imam Sulaimaan?
Well, I was going to defer to my elders first, but we'll just stick with that one verse. Stick with that one verse that we've been sharing, that the most noble of you in Allah's sight is the one who has taqwa.
Yes.
The regardfulness, knowing that Allah is greater than me. It's when I start getting full of myself and thinking that I'm something that I'm not, and having the super ego, right? To turn what did Mike say? Look at the man in the mirror and actually look at those diseases and those sicknesses in myself. So I can't go, thinking I'm better than nobody else, knowing all of the faults in me that Allah has hidden, that have kept hidden, right? and have allowed me to secret. So of the advices that we can give is starting with recognizing my place before Allah, recognizing my position before Allah, and knowing that those diseases, those amrad, those diseases, you track them all the way down, you're going to get to some devil in there. And do I want to be like the devil? Do I want to be living in these devilish characteristics? And so that should be some motivation of trying to and then I'll give you a simple one, a practical one, because that sounds like a young person. That might have been too theoretical. Just constantly keeping the consciousness of Allah on your mind, constantly remembering Allah, and that humbles me and keeps those other sicknesses away, because the medicine comes from Allah.
Imam Mikal, again, and particularly about the idea of us working together financially. Some people talk the talk about us, connecting and working with one another, but your community has done a lot of work with bringing together people's monies. And I find that the best way of eliminating particularly internal racism, that is the self-hatred that you have for yourself and for people who look like you, is to take some of your money and put it with their money and try to work to make sure that money grows. Can you speak on that, Imam Mikal?
Well, first of all, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. By Allah's grace, one of the things that happened as a result of the late and great teacher, Imam Muhammad's teachings, where he emphasized having interfaith meetings and getting to know people from different races and different religions and so forth. And we've been practicing that for a long time. So at the time that we went to acquire our facility, we reached out to the general community, and we had been friends with many of these people for a very long time. And one of the Christian preachers, she was actually a Republican. She challenged the brothers to match how much money she was going to give to our effort to raise funds to acquire a facility. And she said, I got $5,000. Now, what brother's going to match? Because she believed that we, as a result of our history, would provide quality education for African-American children, which we had been known for during our University of Islam days. Many of the children who attended our schools weren't even Muslims, but they loved the discipline. They loved the seriousness with which we taught our children, and the God consciousness and the character building that we exhibited and taught our children. And so because of that history, she had been involved with, dealing with girls who had delinquency problems and whatnot, but she wanted to see us get back into the game. And so we reached out to the general community, and many of them responded with significant contributions. But another thing we can do in terms of practicality, we have not only interfaith meetings for better understanding with people of other religions, but people from other races. In fact, every year we work with a group called CARE, which I'm sure many of you know about. And we've had meetings where we provide an iftar dinner. And at those particular times, we have about 500 people in the audience. And about 400 of them are from other races. And most of them are from the Caucasian and Jewish community. So, it's creating forums whereby we get an opportunity to learn from each other. And then they actually learn about some of the projects that we're doing, and some of them want to join them and contribute financially. In fact, we've had some of our Caucasian Christian sisters actually join a group called the Jewels of Islam, which are women 55 years and older. They love it so much they just come out to the meetings and feel part of the love and the family. In fact, one Jewish group even had some type of bar mitzvah at our masjid because they just love the atmosphere. So we, create these different forums where people feel very comfortable, because, we recognize the fact that we're all from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. As the Prophet ﷺ, Adam min turab, kula min Adam wa Adam min turab. All people from Adam, he was from dust. So these are brothers and sisters. We actually practice that. We try to demonstrate it. And as a result, Allah has blessed us to get many supports. In fact, during one of our initial campaigns, the majority of the fundraising came from non-Muslims, about over 60%. So, alhamdulillah. And then, of course, we have other different types of activities. We have fundraisers like dinners and things like that, or different forums where we have these huge conferences and whatnot, and people come out and support our efforts. So, alhamdulillah, that's how we do it.
Well, may Allah reward you. And I want to turn it over to Sister Dr. Nisa Muhammad to close us out. But before we do so, we want to recognize our sponsors, as mentioned before. One of them was Abe Legal, one of our supporters, along with Sister Saisa Neal, one of the nurses in our community here in the Washington, D.C. Area. And we thank Allah for them. And we ask that you join us in asking that Allah shower upon them their Allah's mercy and guidance and ni'mah. And so with that, let me turn it to the Dr. Nisa to thank our speakers. This also, let me just make sure that you know that our next week's guests, we are looking forward to having guests from the Caucasian and Latino and Native American communities and the Muslim community, which there are quite a few. And again, this is a conversation that has to take place, that has never taken place. When we talk about ending racism, we have to see, well, what is the example? And we know that the model, the best model, is the example of the Prophet ﷺ, who brought together a multiracial, multi-ethnic, multi-class movement, starting from a small number of people. And in fact, again, eliminated the tribalism, because in fact, as was stated earlier, it wasn't just that the slaves were black, but some of them are even Al-Rumani, who was a Roman, was Caucasian, but the Arabs who were the elite did not want to associate themselves, and they were elite, and also they would be considered right now African American. So it wasn't just merely the color, but it was also, again, the idea that this eliteness, this is the thing that we have to wash from our hearts. Any thought that you are greater just because you may happen to have either more money or have a title, or you have a complexion, a skin color that is different from someone else. This is the type of thing that we have to purify from our souls, and we're thankful to Allah that we have this platform to do it. So again, Dr. Muhammad, please take us away.
Yes, assalamu welcome back. And this time I know I'm on camera, so there's no mistaking. So we want to thank all of our guest speakers this evening. Thank you all so much for being a part of our debut conversation. We really appreciate you being a part of this. And we're going to end our evening with Imam Mikal with a wonderful dua. Please close us out, Imam.
A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. Bismillahir rahmanir rahim. O Allah, please assist us and assist not others against us. Please grant us victory and grant not victory to those against us. Please plot for us and plot not for others against us. Please guide us and make guidance easy for us. O Allah, make us of those who continuously remembers you, who continuously thanks you, who continuously seeks to please you, who continuously prays to you, continuously obeys you, and continuously relies solely upon you alone. O Allah, please accept our repentance, blot out our sins, respond to our supplications, establish our evidence, guide our hearts, direct our tongues, and remove resentment from our breasts. And O Allah, make us of those of pureful and righteous conduct, and protect us from the evil within our own selves. Amen.
Amin.
Well, I mean, well, again, we thank every one of you. We thank Dr. Fatimah Jackson, Imam Sulaimaan Hamid, Imam Mikal Shabazz, Dr. Nisa Muhammad, and Hajj Hassan Bey, along with Imam Hassan Amin, who was on but unfortunately not able to join us, and then also, of course, our great leader, Preacher Moss. We're grateful for all of you all, and we pray that Allah blesses us to see the end of racism as a result of the great conversations that we are taking place. If you all want to get in contact with us, don't hesitate to check us out on the Facebook of the Academy of Muslim Achievement. You can also, again, visit us on YouTube. You can get in contact with us also through our platform, as was mentioned before, abe.legal, as well as the on YouTube, or I'm sorry, on Instagram, which is Talib, T-A-L-I-B, Kareem STEM. And we're looking forward. If you have any suggestions, if you have any possible speakers, if you have people who you think should be involved in this conversation, if you'd like to support us, don't hesitate to get in contact with us, and we are available to you to assist us as we bring about the end of racism. I challenge you to, again, never believe that we can't do it. It is said that when you begin to give up hope, then you have, again, become a disbeliever. So that is the same, again, if you give up hope that shaitan can be defeated and that we can end this evil of racism, then you start to, again, leave the fold of Islam, and you begin to reject the power of Allah. Allah can bring about anything, and he will bring about the end of the world. So if he can bring about the end of the world, clearly he can bring about the end of racism. And we believe that racism will end before the end of the world occurs. and we thank Allah, and we ask Allah to be witnesses for that. We ask Allah to not allow any of us to die before we see the end of racism. And so with that, we're going to end tonight's program. May Allah reward each and every one of you all, shower with you all with his mercy, protect us from this disease of both racism as well as the disease of COVID, and bless us to be able to get together again next week, next Sunday, 7 p.m. for the end of racism. May Allah be with you all. Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum salam.